For those of you who have your Bibles, and many of you do, would you turn to the book of James, chapter 1, and I want to read verse 19 and 20. James 1, 19 and 20. So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. That's something we're going to be thinking about for the next several Sunday nights. But I want to ask you this question. How many of you are old enough to remember the original Incredible Hulk series starring Bill Bixby as Dr. David Banner? Anybody remember that? All right. And if somebody irritated the good doctor, his famous phrase was this: "Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry." And of course, when somebody failed to heed that advice, the good doctor transformed into the Incredible Hulk that I believe was played by Lou Ferrigno, someone like that. Anyway, when the Hulk suddenly appeared, and of course the doctor's clothing, because all these muscles would suddenly pop out his shirt sleeves and his slacks would often kind of rip, and he promptly wreaked havoc on anything and anyone in the vicinity. And I'll have to tell you, even though I wasn't really small when that came out, I was a teenager, in fact, or maybe even a late teenager, but I dreamed of becoming like the Incredible Hulk, where I could just toss around cars and boulders and bullies and my big sister, just like pillows, And it never quite happened. Well, although the Incredible Hulk is fictional, did you know that many of us have something like a Hulk that lives inside of us? And what I'm saying is, when a person or circumstance makes us sufficiently angry, then frequently we turn into somebody that no one likes. No one likes. And sometimes we will say or do things that hurt other people. You may have heard the story about the husband and wife that constantly bickered. At least the husband bickered more with her. When they would have an argument, he would say rude, crude things to her, really upset her, but she rarely said anything mean back. And finally one night, he apologized, and he said, "Sweetheart, I'm sorry. I've said so many rude things to you over the years, but I've noticed you've never said anything back. What's your secret? How do you do that?" And she said, "Well, whenever I get really angry with you, I just go in and scrub the toilet." He said, "Scrub the toilet? What does that do?" And she said, "Well, I use your toothbrush and your facial towel." So, I guess she had her way of getting back. Well, with that said, I'm preaching this series on how to deal with, I guess, the type of anger that Dr. Banner unleashed when somebody irritated him. I'm talking about anger that we don't control very well. Or you could call it unchecked anger, uninhibited anger. I think the best description is ungodly anger, as James really tried to communicate. Or as I said, I think last week I described it as anger without a leash on it, that we just let run loose. And how destructive is that? Now tonight I've got some bad news and some good news. Or let's just reverse it. Let's say good news and bad news for you about this subject of anger. The good news is, if you struggle with it, and most of us do, then you're not alone. If we can believe the surveys, over 80% of Americans admit to flying off the handle, at least at times. I don't know where that expression came from, flying off the handle. I suppose that's talking about maybe an axe head flying off the handle, or head of a hammer, and obviously if those things go flying, you don't want to be in the way. But Christians are not immune at all. In fact, at least 70% of Christians admit to occasionally losing their temper and saying something or doing something that they shouldn't. And I'm not going to emphasize so much tonight, but I will come back to talking about saying something that we regret. Because bitter or hurtful words are the most common manifestation of unrestrained anger. There was a young boy, grew up on a farm, and he used to lose his temper almost every day. And when he did, he would invariably say something rude to his parents or his siblings or even his other relatives. Well, his dad did everything he could. He spanked him, he grounded him, gave him a lot of hard work to do. Well, finally he came up with a solution that actually worked. It took a month, but it worked. The dad went out and purchased this long steak. He brought it back home. No, he didn't hurt his son, but he told his son, every time you lose your temper and say something rude, there's an old stump in the backyard. You're going to drive that stake all the way into that stump, and then you're going to pull it out. Now, driving it in wasn't easy, but can you imagine pulling that stake out? Sometimes it would take the son 2 hours to yank and just work that thing until he could get that stake out. Well, he started doing that. Now, it took a month, but it worked. After a month, his son, when he got mad, you could just see he would grit his teeth, and then he would just back off. And so the dad finally said to him, he said, son, I'm glad you've learned your lesson, but there's one more lesson you really need to learn that's just as valuable. And the son said, what's that, Dad? So Dad took him out, back to that stump, and he said, son, what do you see? He said, well, I see a stump covered with holes. He said, that's the lesson. You see, every time you say something rude and hurtful, you leave a hole. You do some damage. And sometimes that damage never heals for a lifetime. And I want you to remember that. Next time you're tempted to say something hurtful. Frank Sonnenberg, I think, responding to that very idea, said it's a lot better to bite your tongue than to eat your words. And unfortunately, when we hurt people, even if we try to get our words back in, it's like trying to take in a sneeze. You just cannot do it. So if you struggle with controlling your temper at times, you're not alone. In fact, some of the best people in the Bible struggle with their temper. Did you know Job, one of the greatest men who ever lived, struggled with temper? And if you don't believe it, and his problem, like many of ours, were what he would say when he finally just lost it. Now listen to these words he speaks. I'm reading from Job, the 10th chapter, the first 3 verses. And listen carefully and you'll see, Job said a lot of good things, even when he was angry, but this was not. You'll see why. He said, my soul loathes my life, that is, hates my life. And then this is the big mistake. He said, I will give free course to my complaint. In other words, I won't restrain anything. I'm just going to say whatever's on my mind. He said, I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. By the way, often that's the worst time to say anything, when you're really worked up and angry. And he said, I'm going to speak anyway. It's almost like saying, I don't care. And then, listen to what he says about God. He says, I will say to God, folks, how many of you would say to God, don't stop? Job said, I will say to God, do not condemn me. Wow. Can you imagine saying those words to God in heaven? And then show me why you contend with me. Like, I'm fess up, God. Like making a command. And then he adds these words. He says, does it seem good to you that you should oppress, that you should despise the work of your hands, which is another way of saying that you hate me? You know God didn't hate you. But that's what he's accusing God of. And then he says, and that you should smile on the counsel of the wicked. You're smiling, you're happy with the wicked, and you hate me and trying to do good. And by the way, Job later repented. In fact, in Job chapter 42, verse 6, when he thinks about words like that, he says, I can't, I can't believe I said that. I'm so sorry. I repent in sackcloth and ashes. I'm so sorry. I spoke my mind at the very time I should have kept my mouth closed. Well, Job wasn't the only one. You remember Samson? Samson lost his temper on a couple of occasions. In Judges chapter 14, Samson killed 30 men because his friends cheated in solving a riddle in which he previously challenged them. I don't know if you remember the riddle, but it went like this. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. Anybody remember that? Anybody remember what the solution was? A lion that had a honeycomb inside, that he'd killed that lion previously. Now, Moses lost his temper on at least 2 occasions. You remember when he came down from the mountain, he'd just received the law of God, written with the finger of God, and he comes down, and the Israelites have kind of just lost hope and that he would ever come down. So they began to rebel and dance and party and began to worshiping this golden calf that Aaron had made. And when he saw that, what did he do with the 10 Commandments, the 2 tables of stone? Anybody remember?
Smashed them.
Yeah, smashed them. He was so angry. Lost is cool, and there was another occasion, Numbers chapter 20, and I'm going to speak of this again in just a moment, where he disobeyed God, a direct command of God. He disobeyed to bring water out of a rock. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Just a couple other examples, and again, I'm just showing you, if you've ever lost your temper, you're not alone. In fact, in this sense, you're in pretty good company. How about Naaman the leper? Naaman the leper almost forfeited his opportunity to be healed of his leprosy because he was furious with Elijah. He went to Elisha to be healed, and all Elisha did was sent a messenger out to him and said, go dip in the Jordan 7 times, and he didn't like that at all. He thought, first of all, Elisha should be out here telling me this, and secondly, that's a filthy, dirty, cold river. Let me go back to my land. The rivers are much better there. Well, finally, he did what Elisha told him to do. How about Jonah? You remember where Jonah became furious when a wicked city repented at his preaching? Jonah, chapter 3, verse 1, he became furious when the people of Nineveh repented and God spared them. By the way, anybody know why he got so mad? When they did the very thing he told them to do in his sermonizing? He hated those people. He despised the Ninevites. He was just hoping, maybe praying, God, okay, to stay away from big fish and boats, I will go ahead and preach. And then he's almost praying, and please don't let them to repent. When they repented, he became furious. God had some work to do with Jonah. And then, of course, I covered last week the example of James and John, Luke chapter 9, verse 54, where they go into a Samaritan village, just asked to spend the night, and they refused because Jesus wasn't going to stay there very long, and they wanted to call fire down from heaven and kill everybody in that city. So you're not alone. I'm not alone. But I've got some bad news. Bad news. Unrestrained anger, now listen carefully, is often a very complex issue. I will talk more about the complexity before I finish tonight. But you say, well, what's so bad about it being a complex issue is because solving it, really working on your temper, takes a lot more time because it is often complex. I'll come back to that. But it leads to one more bit of bad news. If your anger issues, and I want you to think about it, some of us are worse than others. If your anger issues are acute or long-standing, they won't go away after hearing these lessons. I'll probably preach 3 more lessons on this subject. They won't, after hearing these lessons, and you can be very sincere and intent, they won't suddenly vanish and go away if you have long-standing and anger issues. In fact, they may not vanish a month or 6 months from now, because acute anger issues require a lot of time and a lot of hard work. And by the way, I don't know if any of you were, but if you were reared in an environment of anger, when you were growing up as a child, if you saw anger in your house, if your mom and dad were constantly fighting or fighting on a very regular basis, mine did, especially my dad toward my mother. Or if perhaps you yourself did not get along, they were very mean to you, abusive or something like that. If you were reared in that type of environment, I'm going to tell you, handling that, dealing with anger that's in you is something you'll have to work on all your life. Most of you are familiar with what an alcoholic is. Let me ask you a question. Most of you probably know the answer. How long is an alcoholic an alcoholic?
Forever.
For life. For life. There may be a few exceptions where they're totally cured and they never even have to think about it. But I'm going to say 95%, and I think it's better than that. Once you're an alcoholic, you're going to struggle. Now, that doesn't mean that a conscientious, disciplined alcoholic can't restrain his drinking. Yes, they can, with work and focus and AA, but they can never just say, okay, I'm all right, now I can walk into a... No. They have to work on it. So I'm just trying to say, if your anger issues are long-standing, then be prepared for work. And I'm talking to me because, again, growing up, my parents, and especially, again, my father, one thing I learned about my father, because for a long time I was very angry at the way my father treated my mother. And then until one of my relatives explained to me on my dad's side, did you know when your dad was growing up, he was punished along with his brothers. Now the daughters weren't punished that much, but the sons all were. I think he had 6 brothers. They were punished every day, regardless of whether they did anything wrong. And the person telling me that said that wasn't the worst of it. When your grandfather punished your father and his male siblings, the punishment was not finished until blood was shed. Whether it was from the face or some part of the body, if they did not bleed, he continued. And so he said, I know you're upset with your father, with his anger issues, but just remember, he put up with stuff that would give most people nightmares. All during his... In fact, he joined the Navy at a young age just to get out of the house during World War II. Well, that leads to a little more good news. As Christians, with the help of God, we can really learn to control our unrestrained anger, and that's why this series. All right, so basically from this point on, I'm going to talk about what can we do to do that. I want to say two things tonight. I'll try to hurry with this, but I don't want to hurry too much because this is so important. Number one, it will help to understand something I mentioned earlier, the complexity of unrestrained anger. You remember last week I talked about the eruption of Mount St. Helens. And what a great analogy to the complexity of anger. Think about what caused Mount St. Helens to erupt. It was not one single event or cause. It was at least 6 circumstances, 6 conditions, some of which began decades before the eruption. Let me just mention those. First of all, the ongoing collision of 2 continental plates under the mountain. Number 2, the escalation of heat and pressure due to that continued grinding as those plates were pressing together. Number 3, hot magma from beneath the mountain that was being increasingly forced upward. Number 4, a layer of hardened lava that prevented a relatively controlled pressure release. And number 5 is one of the most surprising reasons for the eruption, a thick layer of snow, much thicker than normal, near the top of the mountain. You say, well, what would a thick layer of snow have to do with anything? Listen, when the superheated magma first began to penetrate enough to break through to the surface, it actually broke through on one side of the mountain. In fact, what made Mount St. Helens eruption so bad is it wasn't a vertical explosion, it was a horizontal and partial vertical. And that horizontal gave it so much more powerful. When just a bit of that superheated magma came in contact with thick snow, it produced an instant, I guess you'd call it a steam explosion. Massive. So massive, it significantly weakened that entire side of the mountain. So moments later, so weak and all this pressure pushing this magma or superheated molten lava, I guess we would call it, upwards, it just exploded. And if that snow not been there, then chances are the explosion would have been much more vertical and a lot less dangerous. Now it's the same way with cases of uncontrolled anger. When we just explode, it's typically the result of a lot of things underneath the surface. Think about this. I never even thought about this till a couple of years ago. I was listening to a psychologist. They were talking about the subject of road rage. And he asked the question, the person who was questioning him, he says, what do you think causes road rage? And the reporter or interviewer said, I suppose that someone cuts somebody off, or maybe they slow them down and they're in a hurry, or maybe they do something reckless or dangerous or illegal, and it just gets to that person, they just suddenly blow their top and suddenly drive erratically to, knock that person to the side of the road or cut them off or something like that. And the psychologist said, no. He said there might be a few cases, probably 9 times out of 10, road rage is caused by something that happens long before that person even gets behind the wheel. I never thought about that, but it made a lot of sense. He said they may be very tired. They may have not slept well in 2 or 3 days. And the less sleep you get, the more you will tend to erupt when you get angry. Or they may be late for work that day, and knowing that if they're late one more day, they're terminated. He said we don't think about those underlying causes. Maybe they had an argument with their spouse the day before, or even in the morning as they're leaving for work, or trouble with the children. Maybe they're facing a layoff or being fired. Maybe they're having serious financial issues. Maybe they're dealing with the death of a loved one, or a combination of those things or other things. In other words, he said the bottom line is the careless, rude behavior of another driver is frequently the straw that breaks the camel's back, but if you look carefully, you'll see a bunch of additional straws laid out there that came before. And so it is when we lose it. It's frequently the result of numerous underlying issues, just building one on another, increasing the pressure until we explode. I want to go back for just a moment to Moses in Numbers 20, where he disobeyed God by striking the rock to bring forth water when God had just said, I don't know, maybe an hour before or less, speak to the rock. And he strikes it, and it keeps him from entering the promised land. Why did he get so angry to do that? You might say, well, the Israelites were complaining. Yes, but add the word again. He had put up with Israel's constant griping and complaining at this point for years. It'd been building up like that eruption just until there's just too much pressure, and he just said, all right, and strikes that, totally disregards what God says. I think he struck that rock because he was just so angry. He wanted to strike something. In fact, it says he struck it twice until water came forth. Now, folks, that's not to say that one issue cannot cause us to lose our temper. But what I'm trying to say, in most cases, it's a compilation of issues. Now, you say, okay, all right, I can understand that. So how does knowing that help us? Now, listen. If you really want to work on your anger issues, you really need to stop and think about everything going on in your life that's really kind of on your mind. I mean, irritating you. Because only when we identify those things that we can effectively deal with them one at a time. When I was 6 years of age, I stepped on a bee's nest that was concealed by some heavy grass. I received stings in both feet, but I believe it was my right foot that I received 20 stings right in the bottom of my foot. Now, for a 20-year-old, or 6-year-old, that's a horrifying event. I mean, I was screaming, I was rolling on the ground, and I remember someone picked me up, and it was my father. He carried me to the porch, and you know, he laid me down in a chair in the porch chair, and then he ran inside the house, and then came back, and he had some pliers. He began pulling out one by one the stings that he could see, the stingers. And I remember screaming because it hurt when he would do that. And I said, Dad, stop, stop, stop. And he said, do you want to stop hurting? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I'm helping, one stinger at a time. And he had to hold me because, I mean, I was just writhing in pain. But you know what? When he finished, I mean, the pain wasn't totally gone, but I felt a whole lot better until they took me and soaked that foot in some water. Well, folks, once we can identify the underlying cause, the sources of our anger, it's a lot easier to think about them one by one and take some steps. All right, very quickly, the second thing we can do to help control our anger, and you may hear this say, okay, again, I understand, but okay, listen. We need to understand the time in which we're living in the society. Let me ask you a question. If you could go back in time 100 years, 1921, do you think unrestrained anger was as much of an issue in 1921 as it is today? What do you think? Was not the issue. Anger was certainly prevalent, but did you know in 1921 only a very small percentage of crimes included violence? Now, there were some that did, but far fewer than today. Did you know in 1921 far fewer wives were beaten by angry husbands? In 1921, far fewer children were beaten to the point of abuse by angry parents, except maybe my father's dad. But why would unrestrained anger be any worse today? Now listen carefully. Pressure, stress, the same thing that causes volcanoes to erupt. I don't know if you think about it, but we're under a lot of pressure. Wherever you are today, there's just so much going on. I mean, we have our jobs, we have schools. That's just the start. Think about everything you and I are exposed to every day that they couldn't even imagine being exposed to in 1921, especially those who lived away from the big cities. We're exposed to things on our televisions, our computers, our smartphones, which is the reason Lester doesn't have one. Not to mention our bills, fixing things, maintaining things, extracurricular activities we attend for our children and so forth, and our hobbies, things we like to do. Folks, we have so much more in our lives than the average American had in 1921. 21. And the bottom line is pressure produces stress, and stress attacks your ability to handle anger and to be composed. Someone has written this, that stress consumes our self-discipline in the same way that cancer consumes our healthy cells. And FYI, if you add the word DI to stress, what do you get? Distress. Distress. And distress simply means stress to the point of anger where we lose it. You're totally in distress. And if you add that D to the word anger, what do you get? Danger. And it doesn't take much for anger to build to the point of danger, and sometimes to the point of death. And again, you say, oh okay, yeah, we have more pressure today, but how will that help us handle our anger? This is some of the best advice I'll ever give you or me. If we can reduce our stress, our anger, our pressure, we can reduce losing our tempers. So how do you do that? Again, I think I inferred earlier, if you could go back 100 years, especially if you weren't living near a large city, you'd be amazed at how much simpler life was for the average person in the United States. Folks, the best way to de-stress, now 2 of these I'll cover in an upcoming lesson, is to vocalize, talk about what's on our hearts, the pressure, and pray. Other than that, the best way is to simplify our lives. De-stress. Get rid of as much as we can in our lives that we really don't need. That's one thing. Number 2, eliminate unnecessary obligations or activities. You know 3 words to say that, or 4 words? Learn to say no. The people under the greatest stress in the United States are those who don't know how to say no. They don't know how to say no to their children. They don't know how to say no to their siblings or others that make demands on them. They just don't know, hey, I just need to relax. And if you don't know how to say no, that's just not going to happen. And thirdly, rest more often. We need to rest. We are not a restful society. I was shocked when I read this, but then I thought about it and it made sense. Some of the healthiest people in America. I don't know if this is the top 3, but I know this is the 3 among the top 10. The healthiest people in America, number 1, Amish people. Did you know that? Amish people. I think number 2 or number 3 below them would be the Mennonites, who are similar in a lot of their lifestyle as the Amish people. Number 4, believe it or not, number 3, and I don't know where they would rank in the top 10, but they're there. Seventh-day Adventists. Seventh-day Adventists. You know why? You know the law of Moses, and they basically live under at least the 10 Commandments and some other parts of the law. They believe the Sabbath day is still holy, and they believe on Saturday you do nothing except give attention to God and nothing else. They treat Saturday as a holy day, and they do nothing of any physical labor unless, and they'll go back to Jesus' teaching, unless there's an emergency where somebody needs some help. But you can't argue with the fact they are some of the least stressful people in the country. When Brenda and I recently went on vacation to Myrtle Beach, I had a miserable time the first 4 days. 2 reasons. Number 1, the weather was horrible. It was colder here or there than here those first 4 days, but that was not the main reason. The main reason, I was so stressed out from the week previous to going, trying to get all the ducks in a row, trying to get everything taken care of, all the bases covered, and it put me under such stress that when I got down there, man, I was just like a madman. You can ask Brenda. Of course, I didn't shout at her too much because she cleans the toilet sometimes. But anyway, but I'll tell you, I just was not a happy man. It was day 5 before I really felt like I could relax. And folks, if you go on vacation and you don't really relax until the 5th day, folks, that's horrible. It really is. Well, stay tuned for much, much more. And later on, in fact, after I finish this series, there'll be a few Sunday nights at 5 p.m. for those who want to. I will have some videos I'd really like to show on this subject. I don't think they'd be totally appropriate in a worship service. Of course, we do that in the building, so just be ready. That would be offered in case you want to know some other help in addition to things I'll be talking about. Now, last question. How much do you know about rattlesnakes? Except stay away, obviously. Now, rattlesnakes, believe it or not, well, I guess most of us would understand, they do have a lot of natural enemies. And they do. There are many birds that love rattlesnake meat, and they will attack rattlesnakes, and they're very good at it. There's a lot of larger, did you know horses, now, rattlesnakes can somewhat spook a horse, but a horse, if cornered, will stomp that thing to death. They will. Rattlesnakes don't like horses, even though, and horses don't like them, but a horse will get the better of the rattlesnake if forced to. It really will. Do you know the least known enemy of a rattlesnake?
Garden hole.
Garden hole, yes! Lester, how'd you know? Okay, this is the second least known. The rattlesnake itself. Do you know why? Because a rattlesnake, if it becomes agitated enough, angry enough, and you know, when it first rattles, that's the first sign of irritation. That you're too close, something's too close. You see, it won't rattle when prey is nearby. Then it's silent, because it wants to get, its rattle is a warning to something that it senses, okay, this is something bigger than me, all right, or a threat to me, so I'm just going to warn you. You may be bigger than me, but I've got a pretty lethal bite. Well, when it gets real mad, it will strike at anything that moves, including its own body. And rattlesnake venom, when it gets in its bloodstream, can kill it just as much as it can kill other animals. Now, I say that because when we lose our temper and say something or do something that we regret, often it's us that we hurt the most, which is why we need to be careful. Thank you so much for listening to the message. Most everyone here, to my knowledge, is a Christian. But if there's anybody here tonight who needs to respond to the gospel of Jesus Christ, we have a wonderful baptistry inside, and the water is warm, and we'd be glad to baptize you in accordance to what Jesus commanded. Now, if tonight you need our prayers, we'd be glad to pray for you. You just come up and have a seat right up here near the front. We'd be glad to pray for you. If anybody needs to respond, please feel free to do so as we stand and sing this song of invitation.